What would you do if someone looked at you and decided you didn't belong before you ever said a word? What if you boarded a plane, just trying to get home, but ended up fighting to prove you deserved the seat you paid for? This is the story of Ellis Marlowe, a calm, poised, deeply private man who never expected a quiet morning flight to become a national reckoning of fear, bias, and power. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just sat in his assigned seat. But for one passenger, that was enough to spark suspicion, and for the entire flight crew, enough to pause everything. What happens next will make your jaw drop. But what stays after will make you question everything you thought you knew about what safety really means. Is safety about actions or about assumptions? Before you judge, watch. Before you scroll, feel. And if you're ready to experience a story that's as much about truth as it is about justice, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to see what dignity under pressure really looks like. Let's begin. It was just past 6 in the morning when the sun began to warm the edge of the tarmac at Lakehurst Terminal. The sky had that soft golden-pink hue that only lasts a few minutes, a color most travelers missed as they hurried through security lines and coffee queues. But Ellis Marlowe noticed it. He always did. Ellis stood near Gate B14, quietly observing the ebb and flow of movement around him. He wasn't checking a phone or scrolling through flight updates. He didn't sip coffee or chat idly with strangers. He simply watched. And there was something in the way he stood upright, measured, composed, that made people take notice, even if they couldn't say why. He wore a slate-gray jacket over a crisp white shirt, dark jeans that fit just right, and leather shoes that had clearly been well cared for. His skin was deep brown, smooth, but weathered in a way that spoke of years lived rather than aged. A short beard framed his jaw with precision, and his hair was cropped close. He carried a black duffel over one shoulder and a slim, hard-edged briefcase in the other hand. A gate agent called out final boarding. For Flight 472 to Fairgrove, Ohio, Ellis moved with quiet certainty. Not rushing, not strolling. He walked like someone who was never out of place, even when others made him feel that way. "Good morning, Mr. Marlowe," the agent said after scanning his boarding pass. He offered a small nod. Morning. Nothing more. No small talk. No performative smile. Just simple acknowledgement. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, he caught glimpses of the world inside the plane before he even entered it. A teenager at the window snapping selfies. A couple in their 60s arguing softly over whether they'd remembered to unplug the iron. A man in business attire frantically typing on his tablet. Another woman already asleep with an eye mask on before takeoff. Ellis didn't judge, didn't react. He just noticed. It wasn't habit. It was training. But this wasn't a job today. This was a break, a flight home. He had wrapped a 6-week federal assignment in Seattle just 30 hours earlier. No headlines, no dramatic arrests, no sting operations in parking garages, just meticulous observation, surveillance, coordination with local enforcement, and the slow grind of justice against organized criminal networks. The kind of work that rarely made the news, but often prevented tragedy. As he entered the cabin and located Seat 12A, Ellis gave a quick scan to the overhead bins. Still space. Good. He slid his briefcase under the seat with practiced care and stowed his duffel above. He settled in and exhaled slowly, shoulders finally dropping. For the first time in days, he let the quiet engine hum fill his ears. He reached for his noise-canceling headphones. Then he paused. Not yet, he thought. Not until we're in the air. Instead, he let himself simply be still. The aisle filled behind him with passengers. Some shuffled down with purpose. others with sleepy aimlessness. Somewhere behind, the steady rhythm of wheeled luggage echoed like a heartbeat through the fuselage. And then he caught the scent, first something floral, too sharp for this early hour, followed by the slight rustle of a handbag and the faint click of hard-soled pumps. The woman approached with hesitation, pausing at his row. "Oh, I think this is... I'm supposed to be here," she said, holding up her phone like it was a badge of authority. She was white, mid-50s, with well-kept hair in a platinum blonde bob and an expensive-looking scarf wrapped too tightly around her neck. Ellis glanced up politely. "12A," he said, pointing toward the window. She blinked, looked again. "Oh, no, you're right. I'm 12B. Her voice tightened slightly. "Sorry." He nodded once, nothing more, and turned back toward the window. She took her seat beside him with deliberate care, clutching her handbag in both hands, resting it on her lap rather than storing it under the seat like most passengers did. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet pre-flight buzz, the rustle of safety cards, seat belts clicking, overhead compartments latching. But Ellis could already feel it, that small shift in the air. It wasn't dramatic, not hostile, just off. Like the thermostat had crept 1 degree too warm. The woman beside him didn't fidget, didn't speak, but her body was stiff. She kept glancing at him, then away. She held her bag like something fragile was inside it, though it didn't look like a fragile kind of bag. It looked like the kind that cost more than most people's rent. Ellis closed his eyes for a moment, but didn't sleep. He wasn't tired, not exactly, just worn. Worn from the kinds of moments you never really get to turn off, from always having to choose between quiet dignity and confrontation, from always being seen, but never really seen. The plane hadn't even left the gate, but already, he knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary flight. The boarding announcements continued, fading in and out beneath the murmurs of settling passengers. Ellis kept his gaze angled toward the window, watching as the tarmac lights blinked steadily in the distance. He could feel Margot Delaney next to him. Her stillness was its own kind of noise. She hadn't stored her bag. That was the first real sign. Passengers were instructed to place personal items beneath the seat in front of them. Everyone knew that. But Margot held hers tightly against her chest, arms wrapped like a child hugging a life preserver. She shifted in her seat as more passengers filed in. Her perfume, a floral blend, with an acrid undertone, still clung to the air between them. Ellis didn't mind silence. In fact, he preferred it. But this silence wasn't neutral. It was charged, like an electrical current just beneath the skin. He adjusted his seatbelt, careful not to move too close. The last thing he needed was to give her any more reason to flinch. Not that he should have to think like that, but experience had taught him that comfort, particularly in confined public spaces, wasn't distributed equally. From the corner of his eye, he saw her glance toward his briefcase. Just a glance, then away again. He let out a slow breath, quiet enough that she wouldn't hear it. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Then her voice, low but edged with forced cheer, broke through. "Do you, mind moving?" That Ellis opened his eyes. "Excuse me." She gestured vaguely toward the briefcase under his seat. "It's just, I feel like it's too close to my feet. I have a conditioned circulation." You know, Ellis looked down. The case wasn't in her foot space. It was flush with the wall beneath his seat, aligned like luggage on parade. "Still," he offered, "it's well under." "There's no obstruction?" Margot gave a tight smile. "Of course. Just thought I'd ask." She turned away quickly, her hand brushing the call button as if by accident. But she didn't press it. Not yet. Across the aisle, Jordan Wells, the young black student in a hoodie and earbuds, had been watching the exchange. He was subtle about it, one earbud still in, but no music playing. He gave Ellis a brief look, one that didn't ask anything, but said everything. "You good?" It seemed to ask. Ellis returned a single nod. Controlled. Reserved. "I'm used to it." The nod seemed to say. The plane doors closed with a thud that seemed louder than usual. The captain's voice came over the intercom, a mild baritone, delivering updates on weather patterns, cruising altitudes, expected turbulence. Ellis barely listened. What he did notice, however, was Margot's hand trembling slightly as she buckled her seatbelt. Then she did something else, something that made Ellis's body sit just a bit straighter. She turned her head ever so slightly and looked toward the back of the plane, then toward the front. Her eyes didn't settle. They scanned, like someone searching for an exit or a witness. Ellis watched her from the corner of his eye, heart rate still steady, but his mind no longer on autopilot. She adjusted her scarf, shifted again in her seat, and then, this time deliberately, she pressed the call button. A chime rang above them. A few passengers looked up, then returned to their phones. Within seconds, a young flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Madeline. She leaned in politely. "Can I help you?" "Ma'am." Margot lowered her voice. "I don't mean to be a bother, but would it be possible to change seats?" Madeline blinked. "Is there something wrong with your seat?" Margot hesitated. "Not exactly. No. It's more, I just don't feel entirely safe." She didn't say Ellis's name. She didn't need to. She gestured subtly, just a tilt of the head, a motion of the eyes. But Madeline followed it, and her smile faltered. "You don't feel safe," she repeated, trying to keep her voice neutral. Margot leaned closer. "I don't want to make a scene. I'm a mother. I trust my instincts. And this man, he hasn't done anything. But he's off, cold, distant. He has this black case, and he won't tell me what's inside." Ellis remained motionless, didn't blink, didn't turn, just stared out the window. But in his chest, something shifted. Not panic, just that familiar tightening, that slow clench of the gut he had felt too many times before. The flight attendant glanced at him. "He hasn't said anything to you?" Margot shook her head quickly. No. But it's the way he looks, the way he acts. I can't explain it. It's a feeling." Madeline stood upright. "Let me speak to the cabin lead," she said gently, masking confusion with professionalism. As she walked away, Margot folded her arms tightly and leaned back into her seat like someone waiting for confirmation they'd done the right thing. Ellis turned his head finally and looked directly at her. His voice was quiet, firm. "You should be careful what you imply, ma'am." She flinched slightly. "I didn't mean anything," she stammered. "I just want to be comfortable on my flight." He didn't respond. He didn't have to, because the real storm hadn't landed yet. But it was coming. The hum of the engines had barely stabilized when the cabin lid appeared. She moved with the type of authority that wasn't loud, but definite. Her navy blue blazer was crisp, her hair pulled into a tight bun that didn't move when she walked, and her expression carried the subtle steel of someone who had dealt with enough nonsense to spot it early. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "Stopping by row 12. "I understand there's been a concern." Margot Delaney straightened instantly. like a student eager to explain herself before being blamed. "Yes," she said, a bit too eagerly. "It's not a complaint exactly. It's more of a precaution." The cabin lead, whose name tag read Callie Fenwick, didn't react. She simply tilted her head, inviting the rest. Margot lowered her voice as though whispering made her more reasonable. "It's just that this gentleman hasn't spoken at all, and he has this case. And when I asked politely if he could move it, he was—" She paused, searching for the word. "Cold. Like he didn't even want to acknowledge me." Callie turned to look at Ellis Marlowe, who sat calmly, eyes forward, hands resting lightly in his lap. He returned her gaze, unflinching. There was no tension in his posture, no raised voice, no crossed arms, just stillness, a different kind of power. Callie spoke evenly. "Sir, do you mind confirming your boarding pass for me?" Ellis didn't blink. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the pass, handing it over without a word. She scanned it. 12A, she confirmed aloud, then returned it. Margot crossed her arms tightly. "I never said he was in the wrong seat," she said quickly. "I just think, in times like these, we can't be too cautious. You never really know who's sitting next to you. He won't even say what's in his bag." Ellis finally turned his head toward her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't roll his eyes. He simply spoke in a tone that was polite the way granite is smooth polished, but unyielding. "That's not a crime." Margot's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her cheeks flushed a faint pink. "I didn't say it was," she said, flustered. Callie looked between them. Her expression was harder now. "Ma'am," she said gently but firmly, "for a seat reassignment, especially in priority boarding, we do need a specific reason. Has this passenger threatened you in any way?" Margot faltered. "No," she admitted. "But he's got this case, and he won't say what's inside. And he's not friendly. I think you can understand why that might feel off." Callie turned to Ellis. "What's in the case?" Sir Ellis didn't look at Margot. His gaze stayed fixed on Callie. "Work documents," he said plainly. "Private? Would you mind letting me take a look? Are you asking as TSA?" Callie paused. "No, sir. I'm asking as cabin crew, in the interest of comfort." Ellis nodded once, then no. Silence. And then Margot let out a sharp, breathy laugh. "There you see," she said, her voice rising a fraction. "He's hiding something. I knew it." From 2 rows ahead, a man in a checkered blazer twisted in his seat. "Lady," he said, half turning. "You asked the man to move a briefcase. Now you're acting like he's hijacking the flight. What exactly are you accusing him of?" "I'm not accusing anyone." Margot shot back. "I just want to be safe." The man raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly made you unsafe?" The man's silence. His skin gasps were stifled. A few passengers turned to look, pretending not to eavesdrop but obviously listening. Margot's composure cracked further. "I want to speak to the captain," she said suddenly. "If something happens mid-air and I didn't say anything, I won't forgive myself." Ellis exhaled slowly. Then he spoke, not to her, but to Callie. "Is there a flight supervisor or an air marshal on board, because this is escalating over absolutely nothing?" Callie hesitated. "I'll contact ground," she said finally. "We're still at the gate." And with that, she turned and walked toward the cockpit. Margot leaned back again, her body stiff with tension. She looked straight ahead, but muttered under her breath, Some people get real defensive when you ask simple questions. Ellis didn't respond. He was used to that, too. The soft weaponization of simple questions. He stared out the window, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Across the aisle, Jordan Wells leaned forward slightly, just enough for his words to land without being overheard by too many others. "This is insane, man," he murmured. "You didn't even do anything." Ellis gave a tired half smile. "I did something," he said softly. "I existed. Quietly. That was enough." Jordan shook his head, looking disgusted. Then a low buzz came from the front of the plane radio chatter. The captain had been informed, and moments later, a uniformed supervisor stepped on board, followed by a local airport police officer. And suddenly, everyone was watching. The plane had not yet moved an inch, but the air inside was already miles past civil. You could feel it in the stiffness of the passengers, in the silence that wasn't silence. It was listening, watching, waiting. When the uniformed supervisor boarded the plane, it was like a courtroom door opening, the moment where everyone looks at the judge, wondering which way this is going to tilt. His name tag read Kenneth Holloway, mid-50s, broad frame, salt and pepper beard trimmed to a tight V, clipboard in one hand, radio at his hip, and a look on his face that said, "I don't want to be here, but I will get this over with." Behind him walked a local airport police officer, tall, young, too fresh-faced to mask the awkwardness in his step. He wasn't TSA. He wasn't federal. Just a city-assigned officer tasked with passenger disputes before takeoff. They stopped at row 12. "Who made the report?" Holloway asked plainly, scanning the row like he already knew. "I did," said Margot Delaney, raising her hand like she was swearing into court. "I didn't want to escalate things, but I don't feel safe. I'm not saying he's done anything wrong, but he's been evasive, and he refused to let me see what was in his bag." Ellis didn't move, didn't blink, didn't need to. He'd heard this rhythm before, the careful phrasing, the dance of denial cloaked in just being cautious. It always sounded like concern. It always ended the same. The officer glanced at Holloway. Holloway turned to Ellis. "Sir, we'd like to ask you to step off the plane for a moment to speak with us." "Am I being removed?" Ellis asked, voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Not removed," Holloway replied quickly. "Just asked to deplane and answer a few questions before departure. It'll only take a minute. Now, even passengers who had pretended not to notice were tuned in like it was live theater. Heads angled slightly, earbuds paused, magazines lowered discreetly. The cabin was silent. Ellis exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. Then, without raising his voice, without making a show, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek, black leather ID case. He opened it with a single, practiced flick. There it was, the gold badge, the blue seal, the letters FBI, oh bold and irrefutable, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He turned it toward the officer, just long enough for him to read. Ellis D. Marlowe, Senior Special Agent, Organized Crime Division. You could have heard a hairpin drop on the carpet. Even Holloway took a step back, not in fear, but in realization. Ellis flipped the case shut again with the same quiet precision, then looked directly at Holloway. "I am returning home from a classified federal assignment. I boarded this plane without incident, in full compliance with security protocol. I have made no threats, issued no behavior of concern, and I am not required to disclose anything further unless acting in official capacity, which I am not." His voice was neither defensive nor hostile. It was precise, measured, unapologetically clear. "So before you continue down this path," he said, "I suggest you radio TSA or contact the Bureau directly." The officer looked at Holloway. Holloway didn't say a word, and then Margot Delaney spoke. Her voice was trembling now. "I didn't know," she stammered. "You didn't say anything." "You didn't identify. I don't have to," Ellis said, cutting her off not harshly, but directly. "I wasn't acting as law enforcement. I was sitting in my assigned seat, quietly." From the front of the plane, Callie Fennick reappeared, walking quickly toward the cluster forming in the aisle. "The captain's asking whether we should hold the door," she said to Holloway. "Hold it," Holloway replied, rubbing his temple. Ellis turned to the officer. "You got a radio?" "Yes, sir," the officer said, now clearly understanding the gravity of what he'd stepped into. "Give me 2 minutes." He walked quickly back toward the front. Margot remained frozen in her seat, eyes forward, bag clutched to her chest. Ellis said nothing. He didn't need to, but you could feel the mood shift, a collective realization that something deeply wrong had just been exposed. A quiet chuckle broke from a young man in row 14. "Damn," someone whispered. "She messed with the wrong one." Callie shot a sharp glance toward the back of the cabin. The murmur died quickly. Ellis sat back, folding his hands in his lap. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a necessity. A defense against a false story being written about him in real time by someone who'd felt entitled to write it. 2 minutes passed. Then the officer returned. He approached quietly this time, leaning toward Holloway to whisper something. Then he turned to Ellis. "Agent Marlowe, you're confirmed. Headquarters has been notified. They've also asked me to thank you for your service and allow you to continue travel without further delay." Ellis gave a slight nod, not of gratitude, just acknowledgement. He turned back toward the window, reclipped his seat belt, and said nothing more. The 2 men, Holloway and the officer, turned and left without another word. Callie lingered for a moment longer. She looked at Ellis, and though she didn't speak, her eyes held a kind of restrained apology. Then she turned to Margot. "Do you still want to be moved?" she asked quietly. Margot didn't answer. Her hands were trembling. Her eyes were locked on the carpet. Callie waited, then walked away. And with her departure, silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It was loaded. And Ellis felt every ounce of it sitting on his chest. The door to the jet bridge closed, with a faint thud behind the departing officer and supervisor. But the echo lingered. It lingered in the way people avoided eye contact, in how heads tilted and then quickly looked away. It wasn't the kind of silence that meant peace. It was the kind that came after a storm, where everyone was still calculating how close they came to being part of the damage. Ellis Marlowe adjusted his seatbelt again, not because it needed tightening, but because it gave his hands something to do. He could still feel the weight of his badge in his pocket, pressed lightly against his ribs, as if reminding him you shouldn't have to use this to be seen as safe. Across the aisle. Jordan Wells leaned slightly into the aisle. He wasn't whispering anymore. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "if you didn't have that badge—" Ellis gave him a side glance. "Yeah, they'd have pulled you off." "No doubt. Maybe." Jordan raised his brows. "You think it would have gone different?" Ellis paused. "I think it goes the same way every time. The only difference is how fast the story unravels once they realize who they're dealing with." Jordan looked down, jaw tight. Still, it shouldn't take credentials for them to back off. "No," Ellis said. "It shouldn't." A few rows back, Someone finally broke the silence. "Excuse me." A woman's voice said, clear, soft, but deliberate. Heads turned. She sat in 15D, holding a toddler in her lap and a diaper bag at her feet. Latina, early 30s, dark curls tucked into a simple bun. Her voice held none of the shakiness Margot's had earlier. Only resolve. "My name is Teresa Molina," she said, "and I've got a bag under my seat, too." Margot Delaney didn't respond. She stared straight ahead, like her eyes had fused with the seat back. Teresa continued, not angry, just measured. "Nobody asked me what was in mine, and I'm not wearing a badge, or a suit, or even decent shoes today." A few chuckles rumbled, not mocking, more like recognition. "You didn't ask me, ma'am," Teresa added, her voice still level. "Why?" "Because I don't look suspicious." Someone a few seats away muttered. That part. Ellis didn't say anything, but his spine straightened slightly, not from pride, from gravity. This was the part of the fallout that didn't make headlines, the part that might shift something if people actually listened. Margot remained frozen in her seat. Her lips were pressed into a tight, chalky line. Callie Fenwick, the lead flight attendant, returned a few minutes later. She didn't stop at row 12. She simply walked past, checked seat belts, made sure the aisle was clear, but when she passed Ellis, she slowed just a little, just enough to whisper, "Captain sends his regards, and thanks." He gave a single nod, then looked back toward the window. There was a kind of fatigue that sleep couldn't touch, and Ellis knew it well. It came not from the hours worked, or the distance traveled, but from being seen as a problem before you've done a thing. From knowing that you can't be neutral in a world that weaponizes neutrality against you. Margot finally turned her head. Her voice came out quieter than before. Hesitant. Careful. "I didn't mean to offend you." Ellis didn't turn. "You didn't offend me." She seemed relieved for a moment, until he added, "You profiled me." The pause between them stretched long and painful. "You assumed I was a threat," he continued. "Not because I said something, not because I did anything, but because I didn't, because I was quiet, because I had a black case and brown skin and didn't fill in the blanks for you." Margot tried to form a reply, but the words didn't come. "You felt uncomfortable," Ellis said softly. "That's not the same thing as being in danger." The seatbelt light blinked on overhead. The engines hummed with life. Still, the real sound was the silence between row 12 and the rest of the plane, thick, inescapable, necessary. "You said you're a mother," Ellis added. "So am I." Margot blinked. He nodded toward Teresa. She spoke up. "Because her kid is watching." "What are yours learning from you that landed? Like a stone in a glass lake." It rippled. Margot sank deeper into her seat. Her hands clutched the tote like it was the only thing keeping her from unraveling. And yet, even in this moment, Ellis didn't feel victorious, because winning would have meant never being questioned at all. 35 minutes into the flight, the cabin had mostly returned to its usual rhythm. The clinking of beverage carts, the soft click of laptop keyboards, a baby's occasional squeal from the back. But not at row 12. There, time seemed to move differently. Ellis Marlowe sat motionless, eyes closed not in sleep, but in containment, the kind of stillness that wasn't rest, but restraint. His hands lay on his lap, fingers gently interlocked. From the outside, he looked serene, but inside, he was watching the reel again. He always watched it afterward. The words, the looks, the moment the call button chimed, the badge coming out, the look on her face. He hated that part most of all. Not because she feared him, but because she stopped fearing him only when she saw the badge. Across the aisle, Jordan Wells had gone back to his music, but the earbuds weren't fooling anyone. He kept glancing at Ellis with a kind of quiet solidarity, not pity, but recognition. The sort of look you give someone who's just survived something you've always been afraid would happen to you. And in seat 12B, Margot Delaney sat like she was trying to become invisible. Her tote was still in her lap, fingers white-knuckled around the handles. She hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. She hadn't even shifted. Her profile was stiff, controlled, but her eyes, they flicked every now and then to Ellis, and then away again, like a kid caught staring at a scar they didn't understand. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't know you were FBI." Ellis opened his eyes but didn't turn to her. "You shouldn't have to." She blinked. "I mean, it's just if you'd said something." Ellis turned his head now. "Slowly, not sharply. You want people to announce their humanity to you before you choose to respect it." Margot looked away. "I guess I just got scared." Ellis studied her for a long beat. "And when you get scared," he said, "who do you decide is the threat?" She didn't answer. Maybe she couldn't. He turned back to the window. "I'm not trying to make you feel worse than you already do," he said after a pause. "But this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You had a moment to look at me like a person. And you didn't." Margot swallowed hard. Her voice cracked when she finally said, "I've never done anything like that before." Ellis gave a small, slow nod. "That doesn't mean it wasn't wrong." She folded her arms. "You don't understand." "I don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't explain." Another silence. But this time it felt necessary. Heavy, but clean, like a wound that had finally been lanced. 3 rows back, Teresa Molina bounced her baby gently on her lap, humming a song so soft only the child could hear. She didn't look toward them again. She didn't need to. Her truth had already been spoken. Ellis, meanwhile, looked down at his hands. They didn't tremble. They never did. But in his chest, something trembled for him. He thought of his wife, Leah, and their 2 daughters back home. How many times had he smiled at them after days like this and never told them what happened? How many times had he let the hurt slide off him and evaporate into nothing, because naming it would mean reliving it? He thought of a conversation he'd once had with Leah on their porch, a few years back. She'd asked him why he never got angry. He had told her, "Because anger is exhausting, and I need to save my energy for surviving." He remembered her face when he said it. It still haunted him. And now here he was again, surviving. The seatbelt sign chimed on again. Slight turbulence. Ellis didn't move. He didn't need to. This kind of turbulence didn't shake him anymore. Not the plane. Not the suspicion. Not even the quiet apologies. What lingered was what always lingered. The fact that his peace still depended on other people not being afraid of him. And yet, something was different this time. Maybe it was Teresa's voice. Maybe it was the moment Jordan didn't stay silent. Maybe it was the fact that Margot, for all her deflections, had stayed in her seat. And maybe, just maybe, this one time, someone like her might carry that discomfort with her instead of discarding it at baggage claim. When the flight attendant came by with water, she stopped at row 12. She gave Ellis a folded note. "From the captain," she whispered. "He asked me to hand this to you personally." Ellis opened it. A few lines of handwriting. "We're sorry this happened on our aircraft. It shouldn't have. Thank you for your professionalism. Welcome aboard. Captain Hayes Ellis nodded. Appreciate it, he said quietly. The attendant gave a soft smile, then turned to Margot. Anything I can get for you? Margot shook her head, but not in dismissal. It was more like she wasn't sure if she deserved to be offered anything. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, the cabin had settled into a hush that felt different from earlier. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of judgment, but something more rare. Reflection. A few rows behind, passengers who had watched everything unfold now whispered quietly to each other. Questions half-asked, opinions held back. You could sense it, that uncomfortable, undeniable awareness that something deeper had happened, something they couldn't explain in one sentence to whoever picked them up at the airport. Not just there was a scene on the plane, but someone revealed themselves, and we all saw it. Margot Delaney hadn't moved much since the captain's note was handed to Ellis. Her hand still rested on her tote, but they had loosened. Her body wasn't as stiff. It was as if the weight she carried had shifted from fear to shame. She turned slightly toward Ellis. "I'm sorry," she said softly, without preamble. "Not for attention. Not to be forgiven. Just truthfully." Ellis glanced at her. "For what?" She paused, choosing her words like she was stepping across thin ice. "Not because you're FBI," she said, "but because I see it now." He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her not as a threat, not as a victim of her own ignorance, but as a mirror. And for the first time since this started, she didn't look away. She held the weight of his gaze. "I thought I was being cautious," she continued, "but I wasn't. I was being something else." Ellis nodded slowly. Most people don't know the difference. Margot nodded too. "I thought I was the kind of person who sees people clearly," she whispered. "But I didn't see you at all." Behind them, Jordan Wells removed one of his earbuds again. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but some truths have a way of expanding beyond volume. "I always thought stories like this were exaggerated," Margot said. "The kind of thing you read in news feeds, or see in videos that go viral. I always thought, there must be more to the story." "There usually is," Ellis said, voice calm. She looked at him, surprised. "There's the part everyone sees," he said. "Then there's the years behind it. All the smaller things that led up to that moment. The accumulation of being watched, questioned, doubted. That's the part no one talks about." Margot's eyes moistened slightly, not from guilt, but from recognition. "I guess I never thought how fast fear can look like logic," she murmured. "How you can feel certain and still be wrong." Ellis didn't answer. He didn't need to, because finally she understood something he had long known. Being wrong doesn't require cruelty. It just requires comfort mixed with power. Teresa Molina, holding her sleeping child, turned ever so slightly in her seat, as if she'd heard every word. She didn't say anything, but her quiet presence still filled the aisle with a kind of grace, like she had anchored the moment for everyone else. Margot drew in a long breath, then let it go. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, "but I needed to say it out loud. I needed to hear myself say it." Ellis nodded again. "Then maybe someone else will hear it, too." Margot looked confused. "You mean on the plane?" "No," he said. "I mean after." She swallowed. "You think I should tell people what I did?" "I think you should tell people what you realized." That landed harder than anything else he had said. Margot stared ahead again, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was thinking. The intercom crackled on. A flight attendant announced they were passing over Clear River Basin. and the captain had turned off the seatbelt sign. But Ellis stayed still. He always did. Movement wasn't always the same as progress, and sometimes stillness had a power of its own. As the drink cart rolled by, Jordan tapped Ellis's elbow. "You good, man?" Ellis smiled faintly. "Getting there." Jordan grinned, then nodded toward Margot. "She learned today." Ellis tilted his head. "Maybe?" Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You don't think so?" Ellis looked back out the window, then said quietly, "Change doesn't happen in one seatbelt sign. It happens when people carry the discomfort home and decide not to put it down." Jordan nodded slowly, the weight of that sinking in. Then Ellis added, almost to himself, "But for once, I saw someone start, and that was something. Not a fix, not a resolution, but a start. And in a world like this one, a start was never nothing. The hum of the engines had changed. There's a tone they take on when the descent begins lower, more deliberate, like the aircraft is preparing to return to the world below, where everything that happened in the air will be told through filtered fragments and tired metaphors. But Ellis Marlowe knew this story wouldn't stay in the air. It would follow them down the jet bridge, into waiting cars, into retellings over dinner tables, and maybe, if truth was lucky, into someone's self-examination. He felt it again, that slow ache in his chest that always came after moments like this. Not anger, not relief, just the weight of knowing that his dignity had once again been left on trial, judged by someone who didn't even realize they were holding a gavel. Margot Delaney shifted beside him, her body looser now, but her face held something new, not just embarrassment, but understanding, the kind that hurts more because it arrives late. She cleared her throat. "Do you think I'm a bad person?" Ellis didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out the window, watched the clouds thinning. "Then it doesn't really matter what I think." Margot frowned. "It does to me." Ellis turned to her, his expression neutral, not cruel, not cold, just honest. "You want to feel better? I understand that. But part of growing from this is realizing that not everything gets wrapped up with comfort. Some things just need to sit with you for a while." Margot nodded slowly. "I thought apologizing would fix it." Ellis gave a half smile, gentle but unmistakably real. Apologies are a start, not a finish. The seatbelt sign chimed. The final descent had begun. Around them, passengers straightened, stowed trays, checked phones. The performance of normal resumed, like the last hour hadn't split the cabin into something far more raw and revealing. But Jordan Wells still leaned in slightly, watching both Ellis and Margot, quietly taking in how two people could occupy the same row, but be living in vastly different moral climates. He tapped his phone once, then locked it. Maybe he was composing a tweet, maybe a journal entry, maybe just etching this moment into his memory, a living lesson. Margot looked forward again. "I was raised to be polite, to treat everyone with respect." Ellis nodded. "So was I." She looked at him. "Then how did this happen?" He sighed lightly. Not from irritation, but exhaustion. Because politeness isn't the same thing as respect. And fear isn't the same thing as intuition. She looked down. "That's what scares me the most. I thought I was being good, but I was being safe. For myself." Ellis studied her. This woman who, not long ago, had tried to have him removed simply for sitting beside her. And now here she was, cracked open, for the first time in decades perhaps, reckoning not with what she'd done, but why it had come so easy. "You were taught to trust your instincts," he said gently. But no one ever asked who taught your instincts to fear people like me. The words hung between them like a lantern, illuminating far more than either of them could say. The landing gear lowered. The thud echoed beneath their feet. Passengers began to tidy up, rehearse their departures, ready to re-enter their ordinary lives. But Ellis remained still. "Most people who look like me," he said quietly, "don't get this ending. They don't get the chance to speak calmly, to have a badge that turns suspicion into retreat. They get handcuffs, cameras, headlines, hashtags." Margot was silent, but her breathing had changed slower, more deliberate. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely above the engine hum. Ellis didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, anchored. "Talk. Not to me. To people who look like you. Don't perform outrage. Interrupt patterns. Stop letting 'I didn't mean to' be enough." Margot swallowed hard. "That's hard," she said honestly. "So is being profiled while silent." He replied. A small bump rocked the cabin. The wheels touched down. They had landed in Fairgrove, and for the first time since boarding, Ellis felt something that wasn't tension. It wasn't peace either, but it was relief, the kind that comes from truth, making it all the way to the ground. The plane taxied toward the gate. Passengers began their routine phones switched off airplane mode. Overhead bins clicked open before the light allowed it. But Ellis waited. He always did. He had learned long ago that exits mean little if your spirit leaves before your body does. When the aisle cleared enough, he stood, reached for his briefcase, checked nothing twice, and then, behind him, Margot spoke again. "I'm going to remember this," she said, not as a performance, but like a promise. Ellis turned just slightly. "Good." Behind them, Jordan stepped out into the aisle and gave Ellis a fist-to-chest nod of respect. Ellis returned it, quietly. No speeches, no grand statements, just men who recognized the truth. This happened, and it shouldn't have, but it did, and that's where change begins. The jet bridge was colder than expected. The filtered air hit their skin like a quiet reminder you've landed. But the story hasn't ended. Ellis Marlowe stepped out with his usual precision smooth stride, briefcase in hand, eyes alert without being anxious. He moved through the terminal like he always did, calm, inconspicuous, unnoticed. But this time, he was being watched, not by suspicion, by reverberation, by people who had seen something shift, and now carried it silently like a stone in the pocket, something they'd feel later, when telling someone, "There was this black man on my flight," and a woman thought, and stopping, unsure how to explain what they saw, or how it made them feel. Margot Delaney walked behind him. Not quickly, not fleeing. She wasn't afraid anymore. Just hollow. A kind of hollow that only comes when something you've built your identity around starts to crumble. She wasn't crying, but her eyes looked cleaned out. Her mind ran faster than her legs. Every word she'd said, every look, every choice, playing over and over, not because she wanted to dwell. Because now she finally understood the harm wasn't in volume, it was in the assumption. She didn't walk toward baggage claim. She stood by the gate exit, still, watching Ellis disappear into the crowd. He passed families with balloons, businessmen checking watches. A little girl holding a stuffed bear, she searched every face for the one she loved. The world spun as always, but in Margot's world, something had stopped spinning and started sinking. She waited, once, twice. Then she stepped forward. Ellis heard her before he saw her. Not her voice, her steps, hesitant, then intentional. "You're not waiting on someone," he said, stopping near the hallway divider. Margot stood straighter. "No, I thought so." She swallowed. "I just didn't want to leave it like that." Ellis turned to face her. Full on. This time, no crowd, no badges, no tension between them, but the honest kind. Margot looked up at him, and for the first time, her words weren't rehearsed. "I've been thinking about it the whole flight," she said. Ellis nodded once. "I thought if I said sorry, it would be over, but it's not." He said nothing. She looked around reflexively, checking for onlookers, then catching herself. Because this moment wasn't for show. "The truth is," she continued, "when I sat next to you, I was uncomfortable the second I saw you. Before you spoke, before you moved, I thought it was instinct. But it was fear." Ellis finished for her. She didn't deny it. "And it wasn't about you," she added. "It was about me. About what I'd been taught to see. What I'd learned without knowing I was learning it." Ellis studied her. She wasn't seeking redemption. She was standing in the truth, which was rarer than he cared to admit. She kept going. "I raised 2 sons. Always told them to be fair, to treat everyone equally. And then I sat beside you and acted like the very thing I thought I wasn't." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I didn't say a slur. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just assumed the worst and acted like that assumption was caution." Ellis exhaled, slow. "And that's the most dangerous kind." She nodded. "I deserved to be embarrassed," she said softly. "Maybe I needed to be." He watched her carefully, looking for performance, for rehearsed guilt. There was none. Just clarity, raw and unfinished. "I want to do better," she said. If that means anything." "It does," Ellis replied. "But not for me." Margot looked up. "It matters for who you'll talk to next," he continued. "Who you'll interrupt. Who you'll challenge when they say something sideways at dinner, or at church, or on your next flight." She looked stunned, as if that possibility had only just occurred to her. "Start with the people who look like you." The words came back like an echo from the sky. She extended her hand, not as a demand, not expecting anything, just as something human. Ellis looked at it, then at her face, and shook it. 1 second. Firm. No more. No cameras. No audience. No headline. Just 2 people who finally saw each other clearly for the first time. Ellis turned, walked away, toward escalators, ride shares. The rest of his life. Behind him, Margot stood still, not waiting for someone, waiting for who she'd become next. The air outside the terminal felt warmer than inside, but Ellis barely noticed. He walked past the line of cabs and families with balloons, past businessmen on Bluetooth calls, and down the row of rideshare pickups. His briefcase was heavy, not from weight, but from the quiet residue of everything that had just happened. He didn't look back. Margot Delaney was no longer behind him. She had done what most people don't, stayed in the discomfort long enough to recognize it, and maybe that was something. A black SUV pulled up beside the curb. The driver leaned out the window. Kirkwood Ellis nodded. "That's me." He slid into the back seat, settled his briefcase on his lap, and exhaled for real this time. But the calm didn't come. Not yet. Instead, it arrived. The question. The one that always waited for him after moments like this. The one that had followed him for years. What if I wasn't FBI? He stared out the window as the car pulled into traffic. What if he had been a teacher, a postal worker, a software engineer, or just a man, a tired man on a morning flight home, No badge, no title, no shield. What would have happened then? Would the accusation have stuck? Would the whispers have grown louder? Would the officer have asked fewer questions, not more? Would the seat have been reassigned, not for safety, but for someone else's comfort? Would he have been escorted off, quietly erased before takeoff? He knew the answers, not because he was pessimistic, because he had seen it over and over again. Different names, different cities, same script. The calm black man mistaken for angry, the quiet one mistaken for suspicious, the one with a backpack mistaken for danger. And it always started the same way. I don't want to cause a scene. But Ellis closed his eyes. That phrase was the gun. The badge was just the bulletproof vest. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. A message. From Leah. His wife, call me when you land. Kids want to say hi. A smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. This time, it was genuine, not the practiced curve he wore in public spaces, but the quiet kind that lives at home. He typed back, just landed. I'll call soon. Then he held the phone in his palm for a moment longer than necessary, because beneath the joy of family waiting, there was something else, the quiet grief of knowing he might not have made it home at all if not for the badge. The driver spoke up. Long flight. Ellis shook himself from the fog. Long enough. The driver chuckled. They say the skies are friendly, but man, the people can be something else. Ellis smirked faintly. You have no idea. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Out the window, the city rolled by in flickers gas stations, diners, kids with backpacks, a mural of jazz legends on a brick wall. He thought about his daughters. What would he tell them? Nothing. Not this time. He'd done enough explaining in rooms where no one had really been listening. But that question, it lingered. Not because he needed answers, but because the world did. Why should anyone need to flash a badge to be believed? Why does safety mean silence for some and suspicion for others? Why do we only listen when power speaks? He leaned back in the seat, letting the questions settle without needing to answer them. Because maybe the point wasn't in solving them today. Maybe it was in refusing to forget them tomorrow. The car turned off the expressway, winding into a neighborhood lined with elm trees and white porches. The air felt cleaner here, but Ellis knew injustice didn't need zip codes. It showed up anywhere someone decided who didn't belong. As the driver slowed near his house, Ellis reached for the door handle, then stopped. One last look over his shoulder, at the SUV window, at the street behind him, at the invisible weight he carried off that plane. Then he stepped out. In the driveway, his daughters were waiting. Leah stood behind them, holding a cup of coffee and a softness in her eyes only he knew how to translate. The girls rushed him with squeals and arms, and for the first time that day, he let himself breathe without calculation. Because here, he wasn't a passenger. He wasn't a case number. He wasn't a threat that had to be disproven. He was Dad. That was enough. But as he hugged them, the question remained. It always would. Because until the world learned to see black men as worthy of humanity without a title, none of us were home yet. The front door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in hours, Ellis Marlowe exhaled without caution. No eyes on him, no whispers, no calculations. Just the scent of Leah's cinnamon tea, the soft thud of socked feet running on hardwood floors, and the low hum of a jazz record playing something he couldn't name but felt. His briefcase sat unopened on the hallway bench. It could wait. He'd been carrying more than files today. In the kitchen, Leah was leaning against the counter, arms folded not in judgment, but in the familiar shape of someone who knows you're carrying something even before you speak. Rough flight, she asked softly. Ellis gave her a look. What gave it away? She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her presence was the answer to a question he didn't want to say out loud. He sat down at the table, palms resting flat, eyes drifting toward the sliding glass doors where the girls were chasing each other in the backyard. There was something in that view, freedom, maybe, a kind he rarely felt 30,000 feet up or 3,000 feet from suspicion. Leah poured him a cup of tea and slid it over. He didn't ask for it. She just knew. What happened? She asked. Ellis paused, then said only this. It almost happened again. She nodded. No follow-up. No need. She knew what it meant. The slow unraveling of dignity in public, the rehearsed calm, the badge reveal, the invisible cleanup afterward not for others, but inside himself. She asked to move. He added, didn't say why. Just, I don't feel safe. Leah closed her eyes briefly, not to ignore it, but to absorb it. She tried to paint the picture. Ellis continued, quietly, calmly, with just enough hesitation to make people think she was reasonable. But it was all there. And the badge, Leah asked? He nodded, had to pull it. They sat in silence. He could hear the girls laughing outside. Innocent, whole, for now. I hate that it works, he said finally. I hate that the badge is the only thing that shifts the power. Not my words, not my behavior, just the title. Leah reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. And I hate that you have to wear it even when you're off duty, she said. Ellis looked at her, the tiredness behind his eyes deeper than any flight delay could explain. I don't wear it for protection, he said. I wear it so I can make it home to them. They sat that way for a while, fingers touching, breathing synced until one of the girls opened the sliding door. Daddy, come play. Ellis smiled, real this time, full and deep. Be right there, he called, then turned back to Leah. She said something on the way out. He added, the woman. Leah raised an eyebrow. Said she thought she was being cautious, but it was really fear in disguise. Leah nodded slowly. That's the thing about fear, she said. It never needs evidence, just imagination. Ellis stood up, stretched, then walked toward the door. He watched his daughters Arya and Noelle tumbling across the grass, their world still untouched by the things he could never fully explain to them. And maybe that was a gift, or maybe it was borrowed time. Either way, he stepped into the sunlight. No briefcase, no badge, just him, Dad. Arya ran to him first, wrapping her arms around his waist. You're home, she beamed. Always, he whispered, scooping her up. And in that moment, everything heavy, the accusation, the whispers, the quiet compliance of others lifted, just for a moment. Because this was what home really meant. Not walls, not keys, not even silence, but being seen without proving anything first. That was the freedom he wanted for his girls, and the fight he would keep quietly fighting long after the plane had landed. By Monday morning, the story had already started fading. For most of the passengers, some told it over coffee, lightly. There was this tense moment on the plane. Some never mentioned it at all, and one or two quietly replayed it in their minds, wondering what they might have said differently, if anything. But for Ellis Marlowe, it wasn't over. It never really ended, because what happened on Flight 2894 wasn't about delays or discomfort or a misunderstanding. It was about something older, quieter, more accepted than anyone wanted to admit. It was about how easy it still is to believe the wrong person is the danger, and how fast that belief spreads. even in silence. It was about the cost of dignity for a man whose only crime was existing with too much calm in the wrong row, beside the wrong passenger. It was about the moments that don't go viral, that don't end in headlines or lawsuits, but still leave a scar. And it was about the weight Ellis would carry not as a badge, not as authority, but as a man trying to get home without needing to explain himself every time he walked into a space he had already paid for. A few days later, Margot Delaney sat at her kitchen table in the late morning sun. No TV, no phone in hand, just silence and a legal pad. She was writing something. It wasn't a letter to Ellis. It wasn't a blog post. It wasn't even a journal entry. It was a list of moments she had dismissed. When a black teenager walked through her neighborhood and she double-checked her back gate. When she clutched her purse tighter, walking past a man in a hoodie at night. When she asked for another waiter once in Denver because something felt off. When she heard about people being stopped and thought, there must have been a reason. She stared at the page, and for the first time, didn't excuse herself. She didn't know if Ellis would ever know. She didn't know if anyone would ever thank her for doing the work. And that wasn't the point, because this time, the discomfort stayed, and she let it. Back in Kirkwood, Ellis walked through his daughter's schoolyard, holding Noelle's hand. A few parents nodded at him. Some didn't. It didn't matter. He wasn't performing anymore, because the point of dignity isn't to be seen. It's to not need permission to exist. As he drove away from the school, the radio played quietly. A local talk show host was discussing a different story, someone wrongly detained at a department store. Caller after caller offered explanations. People are just tense. You can't blame security. They were just doing their job. Better safe than sorry. Ellis turned the radio off, because none of those voices had ever sat beside him. None had ever looked him in the eye. None had ever said, I was wrong, and it mattered. And now, it's your turn, because you are a character in this story too. The next time you feel that flicker of fear, the pause, the shift, the suspicion, ask yourself, did they actually do something wrong, or did I just imagine they might? And if the answer unsettles you, if it shames you, even just a little, sit with that. Don't run from it. Don't explain it away. Don't bury it under politeness or denial. Because that discomfort, that's the beginning of change. Ellis Marlowe may never know your name. He may never sit beside you on a flight. He may never need to flash a badge to prove he's safe. But someone like him will. And when they do, what will you see? A threat, or a man simply trying to get home? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't resist. He didn't demand anything, except the right to be seen for who he was. Ellis Marlowe walked onto that flight a man with credentials. But what he revealed was something far more powerful. Grace under scrutiny, truth beneath silence, and a quiet reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room is an unchecked assumption. And what about Margot, the woman who made the silent accusation? She walked off that flight different, not redeemed, not excused, but aware. And sometimes that's where real change begins. Because at the heart of this story is a question for all of us. How many people have we quietly judged? How often have we mistaken fear for facts? If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think twice, talk about it. And if it reminded you that silence in the face of injustice is a choice, then make the next one count. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to feel it. Subscribe for more stories that challenge comfort and ignite compassion. Until next time, stay aware Stay human and never assume.